All right, good morning. Why is this room not 100% full? This is the most important topic that we're going to talk about during the entire, this is about, truly about America's future. So we're talking about educational freedom, and I believe we have a video from what people would often refer to as the godfather of educational freedom. That is Dr. Bill Bennett. He was supposed to be here today. He's so talented and so important in this movement, we actually replaced him with two people, which they'll introduce themselves in just one second. But Dr. Bennett was all about educational freedom and school choice way before anyone else. Well, maybe not before anyone else. I'd say Milton Friedman probably first of all. But Dr. Bennett is rightfully known as the godfather of this. He wanted to be here so badly today and couldn't because of some medical issues. But we do have a video from him, so we'll start with that.
Hi, everybody. This is Bill Bennett, Secretary of Education under President Ronald Reagan. Some of you can remember that. Welcome to Savannah. To Montana, he goes, I'm proud to be part of the Education Freedom Alliance as JCN Senior Education Policy Advisor. Education freedom is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Given my many decades of working on this issue, I've been called the grandfather of school choice. I think the name may fit. As Education Secretary of the Reagan administration, I helped lay the groundwork for the growing education freedom movement we have today. The hallmark of my administration's policy I announced was the three C's: content, character, and choice. Universal education scholarship accounts make it possible for every family to have that same opportunity to get a good education. I'm excited to see more and more states pursue this common sense policy. Now, John Grader's network has been instrumental in getting education freedom across the finish line. We look forward to working with you to help convince state legislatures to pass this very important reform: universal education scholarship accounts. I hope we can empower all families, regardless of their zip codes, to get the good education they need to escape poverty and to thrive in today's economy. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you. Have a wonderful conference. Bill Bennett, signing off.
All right, thanks, Dr. Bennett. So the lights were down for a second. I got a chance to look out at the crowd, and I got to say, very disappointed in you people. No one's laughing. You're all very beautiful, well-dressed. No one has on their Make America Smart Again hat that was in your goodie bag. Those are meant to wear, so hopefully someone will wear that before the end of the session. But that's really what this is about. How are we going to make America smart again? The education system in the United States is not doing well. I remember as a lawmaker in Georgia many years ago, and I think this kind of highlights where maybe America's priorities are, that I would go to the well and I'd talk about school choice and would talk about educational freedom and how important it is. And then I would talk about the rankings, like where is the United States in rankings? And I would remind my colleagues in the legislature at that time that the United States was, 25th in math, 22nd in science, and maybe 28th in reading among industrialized nations, but really doing poorly. And I reminded them, if the University of Georgia football team was ranked this low, everyone in here would be calling for the coach to get fired. But for some reason in education, we're just going to go along with it. Like, it's okay to be bad. Well, it's not okay to be bad. It has real world implications. And this group up here, that my esteemed panelists have been fighting on this for quite some time and understand why this is so important to the future of our nation. So I know we had the names up there, but if we could establish ourselves here, I'm going to go right down the line, have each of you give your name, what you do. But here's what I really want to hear about. What was your aha moment in educational choice, educational freedom? What was it? When did it happen that it clicked to you that what we're doing doesn't make sense and we can do something much different, much better for students?
Well, good morning. I'm Erika. I'm currently the chair of education policy at America First Policy Institute, so handling all of the national education policy, both at the federal level and in the states. But I spent 20 years in investment management. I was a mom of 3 boys, and I made the unfortunate life decision to run for school board. And that's how I got into education policy and the thought that our system is so completely broken. It has been since I ran for school board over 10 years ago. But what really motivated me was when my middle son went to elementary school at the A school that I had selected a house in that district so that he could go to the best schools, and it wasn't working. He was miserable, he hated going to school, therefore I, as his mom, was miserable. And after meeting with every level of teacher, counselor, principal, assistant principal, and they said, there's nothing we can do for him, but hey, you should put him on medication. But if you don't put him on medication, we'll put him on a bus every day and send him across town to a special classroom. That wasn't acceptable to me. I knew that wasn't the answer as a parent, even though I wasn't an educator. And I pulled him out immediately. I found a small classical private school for him to go to, and I saw a completely different child from then on. And every day when I picked him up from that school, because of course I didn't have a bus anymore, he jumped in the car with the biggest smile on his face and couldn't wait to tell me all about the things he was learning, the crusades and the classic literature and reciting his poetry. And my eyes were completely open to the fact that one size doesn't fit all. And I thought, how many other Darrens are out there whose parents don't have a pathway to an option? And that's why I've dedicated the last 10 years to expanding choice, starting some of my own charter schools, virtual schools, serving on school boards, and helping expand choice through competition and better policy at the state and federal level.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mesha Mainor. I am a former state representative here in Georgia. I represented downtown Atlanta. I'm a mother of two beautiful girls, Chloe and Alexis. One is 12, and she's about to turn 13. The other one is 19. She's a trustee scholarship recipient, full ride at Boston University. I'm super proud of her. Thank you for that. I kind of got my aha moment in segments along my life, and I'm not going to tell you my whole life story, but when I had Chloe and I went to preschools looking for something, I saw that this was not where I wanted my child to be, and so I started my own daycare. And it was a quality rated program. I put everything in it to educate not only my daughter but also my kids. And then we moved, just like you said, to an area where the schools were quote unquote the best. Now that worked for Chloe, but it did not work for Alexis. And so I needed to move Alexis to the city of Atlanta. She needed a diverse setting to be educated in. And from there we did public schools, we did charter schools, we did the gamut. And she has some special needs, so we also had some problems there that we had to work through. But then I became a legislator. And as a legislator, the first day you walk into office at the Capitol, the education lobbyists flock to you. I did not know why, but they flocked to you, and everybody wanted me to vote a certain way. And as a new legislator, I just wanted the facts. And what I noticed when I was asking for the facts are the people that were for school choice or educational freedom were giving me all the data that I wanted. The people that were against it could never come back with the information that I asked for. And so when it came down to a vote, being a former Democrat, because I switched parties because of this, when it came down to the vote, I voted for educational freedom. Did not know that that will get you a spanking and you get put in the corner for doing that as a Democrat. And so that was really my aha moment that, I'm not allowed to vote the way that I want to vote for the people that I represent.
Ralp?
Yeah, my name is Ralp. It's a great story, by the way. Ralp Alavarado. I'm the Commissioner of Health for the state of Tennessee, and you thought Governor Lee is my boss, so I served in his cabinet. Former state senator from Kentucky as well, where I served for 9 years. And my aha moment, there's a couple of them. I mean, really, I'm the product of a Christian education. My parents were both immigrants to the country. They were not wealthy people, but they wanted that type of an education for me and my brother when we were children. And so my parents, not knowing at the time when I was a kid, but sacrificed financially, borrowed against their home to provide us that kind of an education. And then I remember when I was ready to go to college, I was looking at some bigger colleges I wanted to go to. My parents having to pull me aside and say, hey, listen, if you get into these schools, we're completely tapped out. We don't have any kind of resources to help you, just to be aware. And later I found out they kind of use all those resources to provide us schooling through elementary through high school. When I got into the state legislature and the state senate, I got an email kind of talking about scholarship programs for kids in going through school, and a lot of school choice and educational freedom issues. And when I saw that, I go, this is great. This would have really helped my folks, knowing what I knew now, going through that time. It would have really helped them. So I remember calling the folks that sent me the email saying, hey, listen, do you have a sponsor for this legislation? No, we don't. I'd love to be the person to file for those bills in the Senate. And I did. I did that every year while I was in office. I was filing that in Kentucky, trying to get that across the finish line. And then also when I did door-to-door, you go, you're campaigning, you're knocking. My district is very diverse. It had very rural areas and it had very urban areas. And I know that when I walked in the urban areas, the voter registration did lean to the right, which is why I was a Republican, didn't lean on my side of the fence, but I would knock on a lot of doors anyway, and I would ask people if they had any questions about what was happening up in the state legislature. A lot of them, no thanks, they'd take my literature and I'd walk down the sidewalk, but several times walking through those neighborhoods, as I knocked on the door, they'd close the door and I'd walk on the sidewalk, they'd chase me down. Hey, no, there is one thing. It's really important for me. I want to be able to have a choice of where I send my kids to school. My local schools are doing the job I think it needs to. My kids are trapped. I'd like them to go someplace else. And I heard that time and time again during those campaigns. And again, not things that I hadn't brought up when I went up and knocked on their door, but people were very interested in that. So just having seen that, knowing my own personal experience, hearing from constituents, it became a big issue, and it's grown ever since.
Well, thank you. So good morning, I'm Chris Mohrman. I'm the CEO of Resilience Learning. Dr. Bennett, who you just saw, is my boss. He's the very active chairman. I will tell you, he authorized me to say this. The reason he's not here, he had some work done on his knee, and he was supposed to be game ready here, and he's telling me this story, and I was kind of doing something else at the time, and he said, well, something came loose, a screw or something, and they had to go back and repair it. So unfortunately, he's not game ready, but it's just that simple. I said, hold on a second, you want me to tell the whole conference you're not there because you got a screw loose? And he said, no, I'm going to tell him that. So this can be our, tell everybody that's what I told him, but didn't mention the knee part, okay? So, as I said, Chris Mohrman, I'm now CEO of Resilience, but I've spent my life around education reform. I've really got two aha moments. One came when I was very young. I was fortunate enough to go to work for Governor Thompson in Wisconsin, and one of my first projects working in his office was trying to expand the first private school choice program in the nation, the program in Milwaukee. It only had a couple thousand spots in it, and a huge waiting list. And so my job was to work with people on the waiting list and have them tell their story to legislators. So I got to know them. And I listened to them, and I was young, but I understood. I hate to say it, the desperation, but the hope. Please give us a way out, something to look forward to other than what we're offered right now. So that was aha moment number one. Aha moment number two kind of came over time. I'm over people, as I said, I have 4 children, wonderful children, 3 girls and a boy. Between them, they have been in public schools, magnet schools, charter schools, private schools, and some homeschooling. I think we touched it all, and each one has worked in a different way for all of them. And so the second aha moment has been, we're 2 years away from our last one graduating. My son is graduating from a private school in Florida this fall, and he's going to receive an appointment to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, which he's accepted. And so these school options work for my family. I've seen 4 children go through this. A second drawn out aha.
So I think my aha moment, it wasn't necessarily a school choice moment, but it was an understanding that the system was really stupid. And it happened when I was in high school. And so I'm at a public high school here in Georgia. This is going to age me a little bit, but my junior year, they finally decided they're going to introduce Apple II computers into the school, which is great, right? Nobody had done that. So we have a computer class. I'm like, this is cool. I'll take this, and I loved it. And because my teacher was actually he was getting his PhD. Probably one of the first people. Very few people back then got their PhD in computer science. He was getting his PhD in computer science at Georgia Tech, right? So here's a guy, I'll never forget his name, Mr. Diffendorfer. Mr. Diffendorfer getting his PhD in computer science, teaching high school kids computers. Probably none of the kids, myself included, had ever even used a computer at that time. Well, the rule was in our public school here in Georgia was you had to have a teaching certificate if you wanted to teach more than 1 year. So what happened to Mr. Diffendorfer? Even though he wanted to come back, the school said, no, well, you don't have the right credentials. I mean, forget the fact you're studying to get a PhD in computer science. You don't have the right credentials, according to this lovely system, to continue to teach these children. So they kick him out. He didn't want to leave. And they replace him, I kid you not, with a wrestling coach who had never turned on a computer in his life because they're like, well, we don't know who to put in the classroom. He's got a teaching certificate, so just let him do it. And it hit me at that time. I'm like, this is not set up for the students. This is just nonsense set up to protect people that might not otherwise be qualified. So later in life, when I became a legislator, I ended up going to Georgia Tech, and this probably aggravated a lot of people in my life through the years, but I look at everything in a very methodical, engineering type way. And so I asked myself, when I looked at education, I'm like, and I wrote this down just for this meeting today, what are the 3 irrefutable truths? Now, if you were here last night, you heard Kellyanne Conway talk about, there's a lot of issues out there where you can see an intelligent, somewhat intelligent argument on the other side of the issue. You may not agree with it, you may not support it, but you can see that there are arguments, legitimate arguments on both sides. I could never see a legitimate argument against educational freedom, and it's because of these 3 irrefutable truths. Number 1, money is for educating students. It's not for building schools, it's not for high school football teams, it's not for buying buses, it is for the sole purpose of educating students. Number 2, more options for kids is always better than fewer options. And I think you heard some of that here. More options, always better than fewer options. And number 3, who cares more about that child, the parent or the government? And if you accept those 3 irrefutable truths, and they are irrefutable truths, you cannot be against educational freedom, not logically, unless you have an ulterior motive that has nothing to do with students. And so I'm going to go back to Mesha real quick, because a lot of us get involved in this, and there are people in this room, and certainly the people on this panel, who say, this is a really important issue for me and this country, and I'm willing to take some lumps for it. I'm willing to give of my time, give of my treasure, to go out and push this educational freedom. But I want Mesha to tell her story, because Mesha mentioned a moment ago, she got elected as a Democrat, right? And it's interesting to note that really, from a policy standpoint, this was an issue that was pushed by Democrats back in the 1980s. If you look at the first major school choice programs in the U.S., Milwaukee, Cleveland, D.C., and the state of Illinois. Those are not Republican strongholds, right? But that's where it started. So Mesha gets elected as a Democrat, recognizes this is the right thing to do. And for those of us that have been elected to something, man, you put a lot of work into that. You put your life into that. You put your reputation into that. You take a lot of hits over being elected official. And when you get there, the last thing you want to do is cast a vote or take an action that costs you to lose all that. And so many of us sacrifice, but Mesha gets elected, does the right thing, switches parties because she realizes that her party is totally against freedom, and then pays the ultimate political price for that decision. So Mesha, tell your story.
Thank you for that. So born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, grew up in a middle-class home. My grandfather was a Navy CB. And when my grandparents got sick, my mom and I we moved from Peachtree City to Atlanta in the middle of dysfunction. You know, it became this drug-infested area, and my mom sent me to a school on another side of town. Now, back then, you could not use someone else's address to go to another school. That was against the law. You could go to jail for that. And so, but that's what I did. And fast forward to today with 2 children, wanting to make sure that they have everything that they need, and being a legislator, representing actually that same community that I grew up in. The area that I represented was the west side of Atlanta, which is where all of the HBCUs are, Morehouse, Morris, Brown, Clark, and Spelman, as well as Midtown and downtown Atlanta. So it's a very diverse district. But when I would drive through the area that I grew up in, I kid you not, I would see some of the kids that I played with as a child walking down the street, homeless. And the thought was my mom had enough sense to send me somewhere else. So I don't know where exactly I would have been if my mom did not send me to another school. So being on the education committee at the Capitol, as we were discussing the bill, it's a really interesting story. So AFC, the American Federation for Children, I told you guys a few minutes ago, the lobbyists just come at you. And so there's this special education bill. And so I'm reading the bill. I am literally combing through the bills because I want to know what the bill is saying and is doing, because that's what I'm supposed to do, right? And I redlined this bill. And so Jamie comes to me and she says, "Are you going to vote for the special needs scholarship bill?" I was like, "Oh, no, I can't vote for that bill because I can't go back to the community and with this and this and this and this." And she says, "Well, let me take this back and see if we can change some stuff on it." And she literally comes back, and I was too afraid because I was a freshman. I didn't know who was. She said, "I'm going to take this back and see what they think." So she came back and she said, "They're going to make all the changes that you asked for. Will you vote for the bill now?" I said, "Absolutely." And when it came time for the vote, I was convicted in my vote. It had all of the changes that I wanted. And after that, I really took a licking. That is just a nice way of saying it. But, they put me in timeout big time. It was all over the news. It was in the media. And I still stood by it, even the next year. There were more school choice votes. I think 2 more votes after that in different years. But I stood by what I believed in. And I continued to vote for educational freedom because I was that little girl. When I was in the education committees, I would literally say, "You are voting against me. You were voting against me when I was a little girl. And everybody in here that votes against me is voting against your own child." And the other thing I want to just say about this really quick is most of the educators, the Democrats, leaders, that voted against this bill, they have their children in private schools. So it's okay for their children to have the best education that they want, but for some reason, the people that they represent, they want to box the people that they represent in a hole. And so that is why I switched parties.
You are definitely an inspiration. Thank you for that. A quick story. I remember being in the Capitol and one of the Democrat senators who always voted against this. I'm not going to give the name because she's actually a nice person. I don't want to cast aspersions here, but it was National School Choice Week, and the students are there with the yellow things around the neck, and I'm out there talking to them because I love them, they love me. She comes walking up and she wants to be like, "Oh, who are these nice little students?" And I said, "Senator, these are the children that you voted against to give them educational freedom. You should talk to them." And I walked away. So I'm not sure how that turned out. Look, this has always been characterized, I think rightfully so, as a local issue, a city, county, state, school district issue, and not normally is there any federal action on this. And look, it can be a controversial issue, even though with my irrefutable truths, we should all be on one side. But we normally don't see federal action on this. But we have a new president, and he has decided to wade in a major way on virtually every issue, but this one specifically, where we had not seen a lot of federal support, maybe going all the way back to Ronald Reagan, who was very much a school choice champion. But Erika, tell us about the Trump administration. And we hear getting rid of the Department of Education, and that sounds good to everyone who realizes it has been a monumental failure. But in addition to getting rid of it, it opens up avenues for school choice. So talk about that.
Well, you're exactly right in the way that you framed it. It opens up avenues for school choice. I know Kellyanne mentioned the ECCA, which actually is not, although the president supports it, it's been around for 8 years. That's the Education Choice for Children Act, which would create a tax credit scholarship at the federal level that then could be used in all 50 states. So the states that have really no hope at this point of private school choice could access a portion of that $10 billion if and hopefully when that passes through reconciliation. But that's a legacy bill that's taken us 8 years to get to the finish line, and it's not a policy any of us would write today. Right? We've learned a lot over the last 8 years in terms of what's a best practice in school choice policy. But the president did put out an executive order asking the department to find ways to expand school choice through the use of federal funds and through incentives. And the department had 60 days to respond to that executive order. The first of what I understand are 4 different Dear Colleague letters that are going to come out of that executive action was not groundbreaking, right? It reminded states that they could use 3% of their title funds and hold that back. And as a state, instead of parents having to go to the district to get special needs services, they could go to the state to get it. I haven't seen any states bite on that. What we're hoping will happen, and what I know that the department is working towards, and I've been working very closely with Secretary McMahon and her team to get creative around how can we give states the option, at least, to make title funds portable. Because right now, if you are a child who might qualify for Title I funds as a low-income student, but your parent is using an ESA or a tax credit scholarship, you have no access to those funds unless you go through the district. And if you've tried to access title funds through a district, if you are not a district student, they make it as difficult as possible. In fact, they'll make it so that you say, forget it, it's not worth it. But we need to change that. We need to make sure that if the federal government is going to continue to fund these programs, Title I and IDEA for special needs students, that every student who would otherwise be eligible for those funds can access them, whether they go to a public school or private school. So that's one aspect, potentially. IDEA funds, same thing. I know that in Florida, in my home state, we have a special needs scholarship. Those students are getting $10,000 to $15,000 a piece if they participate in that, but that's not enough. It's not enough to get the services and the type of school that a lot of these special needs students need. If they could access the $10,000 to $15,000 per student of IDEA funds on top of the 10 to 15 that Florida gives them, it would be transformational for students with special needs. That is the goal. I'll say one last thing. Another policy that hasn't been talked about a lot, but is getting a little bit of attention here, and I hope more momentum, is 529 reform. Reforming the 529 code so that 529 plans can be used like ESAs. Right now, they can be used for K-12 tuition, but not on special services and tutoring and curriculum and homeschooling. If we can change that expense structure and the approved expenses to look more like an ESA, that could be a mechanism for federal funds to flow into and for state funds to flow into, moving the scholarships that are now in existence universally in 16 states and growing from the SFO nonprofit arena to the financial services arena, and I think looking more like health savings accounts, where you have a card and it's just an easier way for parents to utilize those funds. So there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon, but you know how the federal government works. We really need to lean on the states to make these reforms first, but continue to work on the federal government as we dismantle the department to expand school choice.
You mentioned something important. I've been trying to preach this, if people ever listen to me. Most people don't know that you can use your 529 for K through 12 tuition. Now, that if you talk to Senator Cruz, who got that in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, that's like, if you talk to him, he'll say, that's my crowning achievement. Like, this is one of the best things I've ever done in my life. You can use your 529 right now today. 2 problems. One, it can only be used for tuition, and there's a $10,000 cap. But it's still a form of educational freedom that we should always thank him for, and if we could expand that, it applies to every student in America, so that's incredibly important. But you also mentioned that states do this, and Mesha can certainly attest to this as well, and I want to go to Ralp on this topic. It is really hard for a state to get this done if you do not have gubernatorial leadership. The governors make the difference, and when they step up, as we just saw in Texas a couple of weeks ago, things happen. But earlier this year, actually coming out of last year, Governor Lee, your boss, as you mentioned a moment ago, not only wanted to be a champion on this, he wanted to make this the single biggest issue in Tennessee, which is why it got introduced as House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1. Ralph, tell us about that, and then tell us how we took it from there to success.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the governor got elected in 2018, and he's had his own personal experience working with a lot of kids and youth in inner cities and realizing that they could have those same opportunities. And so it was I think when he got elected right away, that's something that he wanted to do. But he's been at this since 2018, since he got elected. And so for people to think that this is just, a switch happens and it occurs, it was a grind. And he continued to talk about this all the time, continued to talk to legislators about it all the time. And I think it's true if you go to any state. You realize the political dynamics is typically in most states where there's an interest in doing this, the Senate, if they're willing, they're usually a little bit of an easier body to get to come across, but House members, it's much more difficult because they're much more granular in their representation. The unions have superintendents have a lot more influence over those local officials and state officials, and so people tend to get cold feet. They hear from them, they get a lot of pressure, and it's much more difficult to get it across those chambers. The same dynamic occurred in Tennessee, where, again, the Senate had enough support that the House needed to come along. And so the governor's been working at this year after year. Last year, in 2024, he was prepared and had a bill filed and was very public about the support for it and wanted to get it done. He got really, really close in the House, and then at the last second, a couple of members got a lot of pressure and flipped their votes to no, and it failed. And the governor's had a lot of success. He's had a very good partnership with the General Assembly there. He's never vetoed a bill, and was kind of prepping for this. And for it to fail really, really disappointed him, and it made him upset. A lot of people got involved in primaries over this issue. People took positions on this. Members were elected. But really, I think as he was struggling, as he was getting close to the end of his second term, he knew that his time was limited in getting this accomplished and done. I know that Alfredo kind of had reached out and said, hey, we'd like to be able to present some information at RGA. Governor Lee was the head of RGA, the president of RGA, the leader of that, and allowed some time and went to that presentation and heard the success that JCN has had in helping have states be successful in this endeavor. And I think he reached out after he heard that presentation and said, hey, could you help me out as well? And so this past year, I think really over the summertime and heading into the fall, getting ready for the session, JCN laid out a lot of good advertisements, really, that people commented. They assumed it was the governor's initiative. They thought the governor and the legislature were the ones pushing this, and we said, no, there's none of that. But the ads were so good that people were really impressed. A very simple message. It's kind of like, it's your money, it's your decision, your choice, and your children should get their education. And it provided cover, I think, for a lot of those members who were concerned and worried about it. And sometimes when you're a legislator, you're worried about doing the right thing. If there's other voices arguing those same issues all the time, it just becomes almost like an expectation. It's a normal thing to do, and people feel like they have someone's provided the shield, taken on the arrows, and gotten that done. And I think that's what you saw happen, so that when session started, things were lined up, they were ready to go. There was already commitment from leadership in both the Senate and the House. And even members who started to get cold feet, like you normally would experience, leadership would say, are you sure we've got all this polling that shows this is very popular amongst Republicans and Democrats? Are you sure you want to vote against that? Here's what the numbers say behind the scenes. Enough that where they got solid commitments from members and they want to vote the bill through. It was really a crowning achievement for the governor who's been at this for the last 7 years. And so now that it's gotten through, it's going to give kids an opportunity in the state. This first year, I think the applications are coming in for May 15th for 20,000 children who would be able to be eligible for this at the 300% of the federal poverty level for the first 10,000, and then after that, opened up to all students in the state to be able to apply for those scholarships. And I suspect that as it gets successful, it's done well, and I think we're going to start seeing an expansion of that possibly in the future. The other thing that the governor did also in anticipation of that is as he moved forward in this process, he tried to take care of a lot of the public schools also. He advocated for increasing pay for public school teachers and a lot more investments in public schools. So as he went along the way, he tried to diminish, I think, a lot of the obstacles and people who might be opposed, saying you haven't invested enough. He provided that investment as he went all the way through the process. So when he got to the finish line, they were ready and kind of set it up. So a lot of chess was played in order to getting that done.
Chris, I'm going to go back to another irrefutable truth, and that is that competition always makes us better. And so I want to hear about competition, not just at the school, the county, and the city level, but now, as Ralph just mentioned, there's also a competition among many states. Because if your neighbors are doing this and they're seeing that educational freedom is working in their state, you're looking at it like, well, we can't be behind on this. One fact, too, I think this is amazing. I heard this last week. I just want to pass it along to everybody. The beauty of America is that we're 50 individual state laboratories and people can move with their feet. If they don't like what's happening in their state, they can go to another state. For 100 years, 100 consecutive years, the state of West Virginia had a net migration outward. More people were leaving than coming in. Last year, that changed for the first time in 100 years. More people moved to West Virginia than left. Two things West Virginia did. This falls right in the middle of what JCN does every day. They passed universal school choice, and they cut their income tax massively. So people said, you know what? I'd like to move to West Virginia. Competition works. Talk more about that if you can, please.
Absolutely. And I think that's why this is just the most exciting moment in school reform and educational freedom that we've ever seen. And that's thanks in large part to the people in this room. But we've reached this point where people are going to know somebody that's in a school choice program. They know somebody, they're going to have family or a state next door, and they're going to start to say, why not me? Why can't my children have access to that? They're going to do one of two things, hopefully. They're going to pressure to get it in their state, or they might just move to a state that has it. And we'll see some of both, and we need to use that to our advantage. The other competition you mentioned is something we've long held, is that competition out there is a good thing. It should make everybody better. It does make everybody better. And it's really an interesting development. I think one of the most fascinating developments, other than the massive wave of bills, the Texas initiative, congratulations to everybody on that. But last week, about 10 days ago, Orange County in Florida took a really interesting step. They hired a PR firm. And they said, any student you can go convince that's in one of these choice programs to come back to these district schools that they left or chose not to family chose not to go to, we'll give you $1,000. So let me start with, this isn't a funding panel, but next time they claim poverty, they got $1,000 to spend just to get somebody to get that count in. So it's about the money, but what it's really about is what's that tell us about competition? And that's the question. And I think it's really good. I'm going to use them as the example, but I think this is happening out there and will happen as the educational choice programs blossom. Districts recognize they have a problem. And that's step one, right? There's steps after that. The problem is you won't solve anything if you completely misidentify the problem. And I think that's exactly what's going on here, and that means you won't see this improvement across the ground if schools feel that it's a PR problem. The Orange County thing reminds me, date myself here, but of Newco cattle, a lot of PR experts. You couldn't turn around without seeing an ad. The product was no good. It's not, nobody wanted it. I'd say in Orange County, instead of putting bounties on people in PR, why not try offering a product people want, that parents want, where kids are succeeding academically, and just as important, something we talked about, usually the number one reason when you look at polling that parents choose to leave a school, academics maybe isn't even number one, it's school culture, the morals of the school. So why not try offering something that they want? Kelly had talked about this last night, and it was really important. I hate to say there was a silver lining to COVID, we all do, but if there was one, it's parents got to look under it. They saw what was going on, and they didn't like it. They didn't like it academically, and they didn't like it from a character, virtue, or moral perspective. And so guess what? Where they have options, they're exercising the roles. Classical charters have been the number one new kind of school, and that's going to go on steroids now with these universal ESAs. And then programming as well, which is allowed in these ESAs, where parents can access programs. Or say like the Resilience Learning Program we're working on, where we say, when kids are learning to read, let's have them read about universal virtues like courage and persistence. These aren't Democrat or Republican values. The other side has made it that way, and I don't understand why, but they aren't. And what parents are looking for, and if Orange County wanted to find their answer, I don't think it's in a PR firm. And so the question of, is competition going to make all schools better, public schools better? You give the ultimate lawyer answer, it depends. It depends on how they respond. If they're responding with pizza parties, see that all the time on Count Day, or less discipline because maybe schools kind of like that, more fun, or PR firms, or lawyers, I don't think you're going to see much change. Or they can choose to respond with academic programming that competes and is better. Or maybe even more importantly, get the woke stuff out and focus on fundamental values I said courage, honesty, perseverance. Tell the real story, tell real history of the United States being the greatest force for good in the history of the world, warts and all. And then you might have parents saying, yeah, we have options, and that's where we want to be. Lots of good options for lots of parents, because no answer is right for every kid. So when we know the answer to that question, then I would say we'll know much more about the answers to how competition is going to affect the other schools. In the meantime, our job is to keep opening up great options that parents can choose and parents can follow.
Thank you for that. I had another aha moment with the teachers' unions when I first got elected. I was pushing charters, and they came to me and they said, "Oh, these charters are terrible. Why would you ever support charters?" I'm like, "What do you mean? That's an opportunity for children to go and have another choice." And they're like, "Well, didn't you see that one charter that closed down?" And I say, "Yeah, that was amazing. I was so happy for that." And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Any school that is failing to serve the children that attend there should be shut down. What do you think about that?" And they're like, clueless. Mesha, I want to go back to you. These are really tough legislative fights. Again, we look at it, everybody in this room, and we say to ourselves, this is so obvious. Competition is right. Parents should be empowered. The money's being spent anyway, so why not send it to the best school for the child? But when this passed the last vote in Georgia, when it passed the House, passed by a single vote. And we're going to give you 100% credit for that. You were the single vote. But there's a lot of people in this room, and hopefully they're more convinced now after the last 45 minutes that this is the right thing to do. What can people do? Because I know the pressure, Ralph, you felt the pressure. I mean, the teachers' unions come at you guns a-blazing. They hate you, right? How can these people help stop that or help support somebody that's in the same situation you were in, maybe being the deciding vote?
Yeah, they do come at you. I had actually the president of the teachers union in Georgia do a weekly video that she would send out to the masses saying, make sure you get Mesha Mainor out of office. But what can you do? You can do a couple things. When I switched parties, it created national news, global news. And there were over 10 million hits that I had on social media just for that switch. When it came down for my next election, I had no help. So there was just no help. And there was no help because people said it's no way you're going to win your seat. Well, I'm certainly not going to win my seat if nobody is helping me. Because at that point, my Democrat supporters were not going to support me anymore. And all of the lobbying groups, the education lobbying groups all said, well, you're not going to win, so we're not going to help you. So there was 10 million people out there that were interested. So helping someone that's out there trying to make a difference is one thing. Another thing that I would say
Mesha,
is,
not to interrupt you, but tell everybody here, who beat you? Because that's important.
a teacher.
Yeah.
A teacher at a failing school in my district where he teaches math, 7th grade math, and I believe only, I don't want to get it wrong, but maybe 20% of the kids are passing in his classroom. That's who beat me.
That's
Right.
sad. I mean, we have a hero here, and we all collectively, not just in this room, but the 10 million people let you down by that. And it was a tough district. It's 87% Democrat. But let's at least put up a fight, right? So that other people have the bravery to do what you did.
Well, you know what? There was some good that came out of it, though, because, you know, Republican values or conservative values are not necessarily the norm in an urban district, but they need to be educated on what exactly Democrat values are versus what are conservative values. And my switch let many Black people run for Republican seats in the state of Georgia after that switch. So it was a plus in many ways. But to circle back to the question, something that I think that would be really helpful, one of the things that I noticed when I was a state representative, we would often do meetings with local school board members. Now, if you think about local school board members, how representatives are in Alpharetta, Georgia, are going to be different in an area where it is 0% reading proficiency. And so when people elect school board members from their community, so if you are in a school board area where it's 0% reading proficiency, most likely that leader is part of that community. And so those leaders need to actually be educated. We would be in these meetings, and lobbying groups and think tank groups would come to the meetings, and the school board members will be like, well, how do we do that? And, the think tanks are like, you make the decision and you just do it. But so they need help. So I think that if more people get involved at the local school board level, educating the school board members, because right now they're afraid only because the teachers union has made them afraid. We need to empower them to give them the information, because they'll receive it if we give it to them.
Right. Last question before we go to audience questions. Erika, I'm coming to you. We talk a lot about educational freedom. I know what it looked like 20-something years ago. It was basically for special needs students. Maybe sometimes a program would come up for very low-income students. And now these states are passing universal choice. We have at least 16 states. New Hampshire is about to do it, which would take us to 17 states with universal choice in the last 4 years alone. This thing has really taken off. We know a lot of it came from COVID, where parents said, this is crazy what's being taught to my children. We need something different. But what does the future look like? What does true educational freedom in America look like? Because I want people not only to understand this is the fight today, but if we win this fight, what will this look like tomorrow?
It's a great question, and I have evolved in a way, as many of us have that have been in this movement for a long time, 15 years for me, and we just wanted to fund charter schools, and then we just wanted scholarships. And now we've accelerated the movement so much that we can really think very big about what a true free market in education can bring to our system, to our country, to the future of America. And what I envision, and it could be through the 529 type of reforms that I just outlined, is that every dollar that is spent on education is parent-directed. And what that means then is that every single parent has access to the funds that are assigned to their student, yes, including local tax dollars, and they can say, my son is great at math, and if I just put him on a wonderful online program for math, he's going to fly through all the way through calculus. But he really struggles in reading, and I need to get more of a small group instruction or an individualized tutor for him for reading. And so I'm going to spend less money on math, more money on reading. He's really interested in history, so he's going to take a class at the local history museum, and he's going to do an intensive history program to really lean into the thing that he's passionate about and customize the entire educational experience for every single child based on their passion, their needs, and their desires for the future. And us as parents, according to our values, that we want to teach and instill in our children. If you think about in the 80s what cell phones looked like, right? The big brick cell phones, some people carried them around in a bag. And we could not have imagined carrying a tiny computer in our pockets when we were looking at what cell phones looked like in the 80s. And I think we're in that situation today. And we're not even at the 80s cell phones. I mean, we are on the dial-up, the round, whatever you call those, rotary phones, in education. It hasn't changed in 100 years because we have not had those free market competitive influences in the marketplace to bring about innovation like we have not imagined. And so when parents become consumers and that marketplace opens up, I've seen some of the incredible innovations in education that can come about in a free market environment that encourages innovation. I don't think we can imagine what true education freedom looks like today, just like we couldn't have imagined what the innovations in cell phones could have been. And it's going to be incredible for every single student to achieve their maximum potential because the people who love them most and know them best are the ones driving that decision making.
Absolutely. What we're stuck with for not 90%, but probably 70% of the students in America is they go to a school based on their U.S. postal mailing address. That's today. Who would ever come up with that system? It was never designed for the students. It was designed for the system, right? Because no one would ever say, yeah, that's the best way to educate children. They live at 123 Main Street, they go to this school and they can't escape. Which, by the way, Mesha, you mentioned a moment ago, I remember back in probably, this will shock people, but back in 2000, like maybe 6 or 7, there was a case in Georgia where a young lady, single mom living in Clayton County, and you know the schools in Clayton County, her brother lived next door in Fayette County, had much better schools. She sent her child to her brother's school based on his address, her brother's address. They charged her with a felony because she wanted her son to have a better education. That's the mindset, right? And so we have to break through on that. And if we do, you know, it's just like if I had told people 10 years ago, you can get into an electric car, type in an address, sit back, and it will drive you there. That's a reality today. I have one. It works, right? You can't see where these things are going, but you do know this. Freedom and competition will take us there. And there is going to be better than where we are today. So we have time for a few questions. Right up front here. They're hustling up with the mics, I see.
So, a product of private school, Catholic schools, public university, $3 who went through private plus public, a refugee from Illinois down to Georgia with my last one. And the interesting thing you brought up about, the one thing we don't have any exposure to is homeschooling. Illinois, which was free choice, just passes legislation about truancy for homeschooling. And I haven't heard much about the homeschooling, don't know much about that, but how does that fit into the equation of this option? And how should it be considered in the competition, right or wrong? And are we prepared on our side for this tangent attack of the homeschooling, because the results are so good? Now they're going after this truancy, even though public schools have a higher truancy rate than the homeschool. So multi-dimensional question, just interested in how you're going to address that part of this whole thing.
Each state is a little different. So in Georgia, the current scholarship allows for tutoring services through the scholarship, but it still is only for the people that are zoned in an area that is failing. And so if there's a parent in another area that's where the schools are not failing, they won't qualify. But we are trying to continuously expand the services, but each state is different.
Homeschooling is the fastest growing sector in the United States. And in fact, I believe it's around 6%, and maybe it's approaching 7% now, but it would be double that if parents had the option to homeschool. So in the most recent polling, that many said they are homeschooling, and another 7% said, if I could homeschool, I would. And I talk to parents all the time who are moving to Florida because of our personalized education plan scholarship program, where they get $9,000 per student to spend on homeschooling or sports or other extracurricular activities or tutoring or other special services. And they're literally moving to Florida so that if they have 3 kids, they're getting $27,000 that they can use to enhance that homeschooling experience for the families. And I think to the point earlier, there's going to be competition among states for those homeschoolers to come and continue to grow their economy, because say, hey, if you want to homeschool, Florida is the best state in the country to homeschool, or Arizona is the best state in the country to homeschool. We're going to give you the resources that you need. We're going to give you the freedom that you want to homeschool in the way that you deserve.
One word on that. I remember we always used to talk about school choice for many years and years, and I think, I don't know who did this, but educational freedom is such a better term. And it goes to exactly what you're talking about. And Erika talked about the great options in Florida, and Georgia has some. Most of the programs do. The new program in Texas has, I believe it's $2,500 will be available to the 500,000 homeschoolers in Texas to access those funds for supplemental programs or programs that really go to supplement and grow the interest of that child. I think it's we always talk about the schools and the tuition aspect of these programs, and so I want to encourage people to think about it. I think it's a little undercovered that most of these programs do have a component where people not in the private or public school system can access that, essentially homeschoolers. Now, it is critical, and we all know this, that the bill be very clear this does not bring along regulation. That just because you participate in a program like that does not bring increase or any new regulation to the homeschool community. That's critical. But having said that, I think that's an important way we can grow this out and grow the choice movement, is remind people that educational freedom is for all kinds of choices, including helping homeschoolers have the assets to run the most effective program for their child. Of course, they know best how to do that.
And can I just say, homeschooling has existed since the beginning of time. It's called a parent helping a student with homework. That is homeschooling, right? The question is, are we going to financially support that? And it's like somebody asked me years ago when I was debating this issue about homeschooling, I'm like, do you eat every meal in or do you eat every meal out? And everyone like, that's a ridiculous question. I go out to eat sometimes, I eat home sometimes. That's the same thing with education. You go to school for education, you come home and those parents are educating as well. And so we should be supporting that in any way that we can. And to your point, a truly individualized plan is that parent being totally integrated into those decisions. 10 years ago, when I was teaching my children would come home and get their homeschooling after school, they were getting it on Khan Academy. At the time, Sal Khan was the single biggest teacher in all of human history. He taught more students than anybody. That might have changed now because there are other options, but that is really what homeschooling is about, is parents being involved directly in the education of their children. And how do we as society say, you know what, they're doing a really good job, why don't we financially support them in ways to make that even better? Next question, right here in front.
Hi, my name is Jean, and I very strong stance. Talk about school choice, but the one thing that I haven't heard anything about is literacy. Literacy is everything to do with school choice. And I was just wondering, maybe in the message of school choice, we all know that kids can be anything they want to be if they know how to read. That's so important. So I was just wondering if there's somehow you can put the literacy in the message of school choice, which would maybe more people would understand.
Yeah, I think Mesha mentioned a moment ago a school where you represented where the children reading on grade level was 0%.
And you probably are aware, but there is the Georgia Literacy Council. So last year we did implement a lot into literacy in particular. But you're right, we do need to add it in that messaging.
And we have a national crisis in reading, right? 1 in 3 students can read proficiently in this country. And with 3 boys, if only one of my kids could read, I would be absolutely furious with whoever's in charge, right? And we should be that way as Americans. And the entire system is totally broken. But there are a lot of education ills. You're fighting against the teachers' unions, which are horrible for education and for kids. The funding mechanisms. And the reason why I focus my energy personally on education freedom, school choice, and the free market is because the literacy crisis will be solved through free market competition. I believe that we will see the Yelps of education come about, where parents are going to have access to real information about literacy rates in those schools, about safety in those schools, about the values espoused in those schools, because they're going to be seeking out a plethora of information when they are able to make choices in a competitive environment. And so the government doesn't have to tell us anymore, anymore. They shouldn't have to tell us where to eat, because we have access to that information because of the free market. And so, yes, we do absolutely have a literacy crisis in America, and we need to focus on that. And in fact, I think it should be declared a national emergency. But free market competition is what's going to drive innovations and better performance in reading and literacy across the board.
There's a question out here from a very important gentleman, guys running this place. I think you missed the first few minutes, Alfredo, when I told everyone in the audience they look beautiful, but they would look even better if they were wearing a certain product, which you want to show us.
That's right. Just want to make sure everybody looks in their swag bag. They have a wonderful hat. What does it say? It says, "Make America Smart Again." So that's for you all to wear. Hopefully wear it nice and proud. Two, I just want to make a quick comment. I want to make sure that this doesn't get lost on people, and for anybody who's a representative here for the state of Georgia or anywhere else, quite frankly, what Mesha did was amazing. It was a heroic effort what she did, and this part, yes. First of all, let's give her a big applause for that. But what we did to help her is pathetic, because this party did nothing to help her after she took that heroic effort. We just let her sit there and just absolutely just get attacked from the left. No monies were allocated to her. The GOP said, you can't really win that race anyway, so we're just going to pass. Well, how do you think that rewards other Democrats that might want to say, you know what, Mesha did it, why not us do it? No one's going to do it again, and that's why the Democrats made sure that she lost, because they wanted to make an example out of her. And so I think it's pathetic that we didn't support her, and I want to make sure that that message goes out to all across the country, if we can somehow, that we have to support people that take brave choices like that, right? And actually support people who do that. I mean, she switched the party, right? In a district that was 87% Democrat. I mean, she knew that she was taking a chance there. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being the one vote that made the difference. And thank God you were there to do that. But we got to make sure we support people like Mesha all across the country when they do that. So that's all I have to say.
A great closing comment. So actually, since she is the hero of the panel, we're going to let Mesha have the last word.
Just thank you, Alfredo. This is a wonderful organization. It's my second time coming here. I encourage you guys to make sure you tell other people to come to the next event. As you see, it's very informative. Education is just one of the things that are hot topics, but I agree with you that I wish more people were in here listening, because our kids are our future.
Amen to that. Panel, thank you so much for your time today.